My audience is still too busy to start. Okay, welcome. Welcome to Chromatic Wednesdays. Oh, that's like a teleprompter here, perfect. You have my script on it now. Welcome to Glaring Light. It's the episode 23 of the beautiful Chromatic Wednesdays series here at Apartment Project Berlin, which is organized by Emre and Meli. So I immediately start with this biggest thanks of this year to the two of you to organizing these series and to make absolute sure that we're gonna have our perfect screening tonight. So thanks Emre and Meli. So my name is Florian Wüst. I'm an old friend of Apartment Project, I dare to say. And so I'm especially pleased that I have the honor to introduce and to present you this last Chromatic Wednesdays series this year, and also the last one of session number 2, right? And so these are events, performances here at the Apartment Project in Neukölln, always taking place on Wednesday, and that can be in the form of screenings, performances, talks. And it's always live streamed at the same time, so it's a real hybrid event. So also welcome to our online audience. And tonight we have Glaring Light. And as you can see, the theme is curiosity. So there have been a couple of themes running throughout the year. And so as I've been the last one this year, I had two to choose from that still were missing one Wednesday night. It was inversion and curiosity. And I kept a bit struggling because there were films in my mind I could screen. What do I have for inversion? Curiosity, I don't know. It's shortly before Christmas, so it should also relate to our moods in these days. And then luckily, I mean, first I got the films together and they still should make sense out of them in terms of the theme and choose one of the two themes. And then I was very pleased by reading the it's very trivial act to look up what does curiosity all means. So I end up on Wikipedia and it really helped me with this. Curiosity from Latin, curiositas, from curiosus, careful, diligent, curious, akin to cura, care. So curiosity is a quality related to inquisitive thinking such as exploration, investigation, and processes of learning, evident by observation in humans and animals. Curiosity is associated with the desire to gain knowledge or information. So I think that's very clear to us how important it is when you start an endeavor, an exploration, that you need to be curious. You have a question in mind. But then I had not been thinking of this other meaning of careful, something also to take care. So connect curiosity maybe with responsibility, so that you have also responsibility what you're looking for, what you're curious at. And that's maybe the part we unlearned to consider when we are curious, to explore and to gain knowledge and new skills. And think we are the only ones to master anything that we need to explore, discover, know more about. So maybe with that in the back of your minds, watch those 3 films tonight, Glaring Light. But of course that also, I mean, the title refers a little bit to those lights of this moment in the year. But it doesn't bring us to wintry landscapes, but the absolute opposite, to landscapes that are extremely dry and have nothing to do with Christmas feelings, as we know them as Northern Europeans. Okay, in Glaring Light, 3 films explore both terrestrial and planetary landscapes to glimpse the future existing in the past. Myth and poetic speculation pervade the cinematic journeys that take us from arid dryness, light pollution, and insomnia to the political struggle for women's rights. Compelled by photographs from NASA's expeditions depicting Mars topography, Lisa Tan highlights how the planet's dry lake beds, undulating sand dunes and horizon could be our own in the future, in My Pictures of You. Jessica Bardsley's Life Without Dreams is set in the outer space of consciousness where extraterrestrial surfaces form the terrain for a reflection on 24/7 capitalism. In the third film, Alturas, Roxana Reiss portrays Elisa Topoada, who campaigns to be elected as the first councilwoman of her village in the vast Andean mountains of Peru. All films are in English or in Spanish with English subtitles. Followed by a conversation, we're gonna have the screening followed by a conversation with Swedish curator Lisa Rosendahl. So I'm very happy that Lisa is here with us because she's based in Berlin. Also, she is Associate Professor of Exhibition Studies at the Oslo National Academy of the Arts. Among many other exhibitions across Scandinavia, she has curated the 2019 and the 2021 editions of the Gothenburg International Biennial for Contemporary Art. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm sorry that Roxana, who was announced to also join us, so the filmmaker of the third film, who 2 years ago won the Deutsche Kurzfilmpreis for documentaries up to 30 minutes. She had lately a concussion, and still today especially she's down with headaches, so she excuses herself so that she cannot join. So we're going to have, after the screening, the conversation with Lisa, and we are looking forward that you join us as well in our discussion, reflection about the films, about the chromaticness of this evening. Okay, thanks again. Enjoy the screening. See you in a bit. Good here for the camera? Good. Okay, maybe a few words, because at my introduction I didn't say much about the artists, so I go in reverse. So Roxana Reiss is actually, she's from Berlin, and she's now here in Berlin visiting her family, because she at the moment studies in Copenhagen camera. But as unfortunately she cannot join. So as mentioned, the film Alturas won the Deutsche Kurzfilmpreis in 2020, and it was her first documentary work she directed herself, and it was her BA film at the HFBK in Hamburg, and she also studied at FUC in Buenos Aires. And Jessica Bardsley is an artist and PhD candidate in visual and environmental studies and critical media practice at Harvard University. And the first film, My Pictures of You, is by Lisa Tan, and she's an artist and educator based in Stockholm. She's from the US. And as you could sense in the film as well, she draws a lot in her work from literature and the history on photography. Her work is not only in video, but also films, but works in all kinds of media and also creates installations. And you could see very small in the credits that Lisa actually commissioned My Pictures of You for an exhibition you curated, was entitled Extracts from a Future History. It was commissioned or funded by the Public Art Agency in Sweden. And it was an exhibition that dealt with the topic of extraction in reference to the north of Scandinavia, and which is also a big side of a long history of exploration, and also a long history of exploration or extraction from indigenous lands. And Maybe you could give a bit of a background to that, because what's interesting in the film you commissioned of Lisa, it's not so directly about extraction. So maybe you can share with us a bit also her thought process in developing that work. I suppose you had conversations about that. And so give you some insight into the larger project and how that then ended up in this particular film as Lisa's contribution to it.
Maybe first I can say thank you to you for putting together these 3 films, and I thought it was a very sensitive and insightful combination of these 3 films, starting with My Pictures of You, with Lisa Tan's film, which obviously is looking at dryness and the planet Mars, as she says in the film, as something that we could perhaps understand as the death mask of the Earth. So how Earth will look like in the future. But then Jessica's film also shows us that this capitalist system that is draining the planet of not only water but all life essentially is also entering the human body and depleting us of our dreams and so on. And then the final film, which again weaves in the arid landscape and the dryness and the very real concrete effects that it has on a specific indigenous community, and this amazing character who's what's her name, Elisa Tabu, yeah, who's running for council, exactly, of the village as the very first female politician. Anyway, I think you made a great curatorial work there, weaving together these themes that I'm sure will come up in the conversation. But yeah, so to go back to Lisa's film and to the larger project, it was an exhibition in the city of Luleå, which is just below the polar circle in Sweden. And as you say, it's a mining district and has been for a very long time. So there's enormous iron mines and copper mines located there. Some of the biggest mines in the world, in fact, and the biggest iron mine in Europe, I believe. But because of this mining industry and the steel industry that also is located there, they built an enormous hydraulic power network there. So all the rivers that go through the land are more or less destroyed through being used for these hydraulic power networks. And this green power, as they call it nowadays, of course, has devastating effects for the indigenous communities there. But it's also a resource, this green electricity, that is attracting a lot of new technology to this region. So you have huge data centers being built there. For example, Facebook have their European servers are all located up there, and there's also Bitcoin mining and so on. And what struck me when I came there to do research almost 10 years ago now was this link between the mineral extraction that has been going on there for over 100 years and this kind of social and emotional extraction that companies like Facebook and so on, social media, are doing, and how they are actually materially linked through, in that location, the electricity that is harvested from the rivers that in turn dry up or have to be rerouted, and then is fed into these extractive machines.
Because you still need to cool them down, or so they're already in cold climate. That's why they're built up there.
Exactly, the cold climate is another reason. So that project was very much about, on the one hand, trying to conflate the depletion of the Earth's resources with the depletion of human social ability and human emotion, and to try to create some sort of empathic mirroring between ourselves and the Earth somehow. And then it was dealing with history, like Lisa's film also does, and the kind of idea of a future history about our own time. So actually in Lisa's film, if you remember, there's a swimming pool, and that was one of the locations that we used for the exhibition and where we actually showed Lisa's work. And in fact, the whole exhibition was located in buildings like the swimming pool that were built in Luleå in the 1950s, when the Swedish industrial economy and project was at its kind of peak in a way, and where it was surrounded by so much optimism that this was what's going to save us all in a way. And there was a series of buildings built then, like the swimming pool, which you have to understand, you know, in a very, very cold climate, a fully heated swimming pool like that is it's kind of a miracle, you know, and it's a luxury. But also we used an underground military center and an old post office and so on. If you behind the swimming pool, if you see through these glass windows, you actually see the Luleå River, which is one of these hydraulic power network sources, exactly, but is also a river that has sustained life in that region for, well, since before history. Yes, so in terms of Lisa's process, oh yes, I mean, so the third interesting thing out of many in that region is that there's also a space program. There's the European Space Station up there, and the man that you saw in Lisa's film, he's a scientist at the Luleå Technical University who's researching the history of water on Mars. So he was part of the team working with NASA that first located the existence of water on Mars, and is now researching the history of that and why it disappeared. I invited Lisa to come up and spend time there and to see what she could find. And quite early on, we went together actually to the space station and so on. And then she said to me, well, I think, do you mind if I will make a film that is actually focusing on another place, which is Mars, but also Texas and the desert landscapes around there where she grew up. And yes, this is what the film became, I guess. So she's kind of conflating images of Mars with images of the Earth, but also images of the north of Sweden with images of the desert in the US, and talking about dryness and death and love and image making in the center of this.
Photography more particular. I mean, it's quite in the face, but at the same time not. That, you know, next to the tablet you have then by chance the Helle Kammer, Camera Lucida of Roland Barthes, of course, which is like, I mean, I also read it when I was a little art student, and sort of a real crucial seminal introduction into the theory of photography. And where then she also shows in one moment, no, that it's about what has been. And so these little subtle references and this kind of collage of things across time she creates, as you say, with the pool, but suddenly you confuse it also with biosphere too. From the facade, so all this kind of blends into, and like future and history become one thing, you know, you cannot, or the trouble to distinguish it. So that I quite like about her strategy in the film, how she does that. Yeah.
As you said, I mean, it's very open in many ways. So she also doesn't tie you down to a certain narrative and so on. But it was nice seeing it again now and a couple of days ago when you sent me the link again, because it's always details that you see and that's kind of pop up. So yeah, a pleasure to see it again. And for example, there's a reference in the desert. You probably noticed she zooms in on this little sign, which I guess is a road sign,
wolf.
Where it says wolf, referencing, in Lisa's case, I guess, to Virginia Woolf, who also is a... Lisa has made other films about Virginia Woolf, and particularly the work Waves, for example.
One intention for this combination of films was also how the use of photography is in there, or to what extent it stresses also a very photographic gaze in the films. Did you read that as well? Is that something that came up to you, or how you would put that in relation to photography, and or how you experience photography in film, this intrinsic relationship of photography in film, technically, necessarily, but here it's also a very poetic visuality, and also in Lisa's very poetic in a way.
Yes.
You know, also we have it, I think, with very concrete topics, which are also sort of then put in opposition to each other. So I very much like in The Life Without Dreams, the scenes of the, for instance, the bats, and then when they are in flight and they catch the insect or so, and then you have this succession of very direct or letters on the screen, or just the dysfunction of those sleeping medication. So this kind of put in contrast.
Something which I think also worked really well as a program with these three films is, of course, the rhythm of them. And they're quite, I mean, already Lisa's film sort of brings you down a little bit to a slightly slower rhythm that is then running through Jessica's and Roxana's films from very different points of view. I mean, Roxana is really making a documentary, but she's capturing the rhythm of the daily life and the extreme care that this Elisa is giving, actually, throughout the whole film in relationship to different subjects. I mean, for example, the scene where she meets the old woman and they talk about the stomach pains, and then there's a little something in the finger. And I mean, Elisa is actually on her way to this election, and it must be, you know, very big.
Her speech on the main screen.
Yeah, right. But she takes the time to take care of this person and sit down, and so I think that's also something in all these three films, that they draw you in a certain rhythm of care.
So please join us at any moment. There's also a floating microphone. Jochen.
It's only a silly commentary that the Mars mission has to stop because of the dust, because the dust goes over the sensors and the sensors have to stop because we can't see and get signals out of it.
There's nobody
anymore.
to clean it.
No, not yet. No robots.
Yeah, so this dryness actually obscures our seeing also. It was a nice detail that it's called Curiosity, the mission, the space mission.
Yes, exactly. But I was so happy when I discovered that by looking again at Lisa's, and I had already chosen for the Curiosity, and that, yes, that's it. But I didn't tell anybody here before. That's something to. I didn't know that it was called Curiosity, the Mars. I thought it was just Mars rover or so. Yeah.
I thought it was nice in your introduction also that you made that connection between curiosity and care, because that's something I had never really thought about, and how we need to maintain care in our curiosity, which I think Roxana really does in her way of approaching this village and the subjects that she films. So it was a nice link.
Yeah, also I didn't realize that before, or wasn't just simply aware of it. But in a way it's so logic, and I think as I introduced, I mean, that's something I think we largely got lost, being curious about something, but then this desire needs to be also acted carefully, or acknowledge what you're looking for, or what you're searching, basically, or what you raise interest or put interest in, right? And so, yeah, that's what I intended to express as well with this, thinking, okay, what could be the screening for the last event we all share before we end up this year and kind of retreat and so on, and relax. So a little bit, capture that atmosphere and the spirit of it, and at the same time then do this through a very this type of very conscious but also very poetic, I mean, as banal as it sounds, imagery, and also allow that within a documentary or essayistic reflection. And that's what I found interesting about Jessica, how she deals with that, like with her own, goes through the own experience of the artist, of sleeplessness, of insomnia. Probably she tried all these medications she's listing, and then realizing that, and what's the larger scope of our sleeplessness, and what does it mean to have this permanently enlightened planet where darkness is taken, and then no sleep to not only human beings or humans sleep in trouble, but any animals all around. So that kind of seeps into that sort of visual essay.
And makes us think, I guess, of Mark Fisher and his book about sleep and sleeplessness and its connection to capitalism and so on.
Lisa, you're the last Gothenburg biennial you curated that was focusing on artistic practice as a critical narration and historiography, and how also through artworks or artistic practices counter histories are developed. Could you expand a bit on that, also with the background of maybe these films, how they do, and
Oh, well, I guess it's clear that, you talk about it's the end of the year, but I mean, it's the end of the planet, as we can see in the films. But I guess it's also the end of a certain telling about the world. We need to drastically reorient the narrative of
the imagination.
And the imagination, right? So, I guess this is what these three films, for sure, what they do, and that's in the biennial also. The biennial was conceived in relation to a specific historical situation, which was the 400-year anniversary of the city of Gothenburg, and I chose to look at the colonial past of that city, which is the kind of international trading point in Sweden. It was always this window to the Atlantic, it's called. Yes, so the city was celebrating itself, and we were looking at the narratives that the city is telling about itself, and thinking about what could art and artists bring to that situation, and what type of counter stories do we actually need to tell now? So that was the starting point, I guess. Yes. But to unpack the whole biennial, I think, I don't know.
No,
It
that
was,
was
yeah.
just, I mean, that interest, or I think you explained very nicely how we need these counter narratives also to imagine different ways of organizing society, of our economic imprint on the planet and all that. I mean, on all levels, we need to get busy with, right? And or do things different, but that starts with a different narrative and with a different imagination. And there, I think art plays quite a decisive role.
And Lisa Tan, she has described the film we saw tonight as a love letter to Earth, and as a kind of ecstatic love letter to Earth. And I think this, what you call poetry, which I agree is poetry, but a kind of embodied and emotional and ecstatic reconnection with where we actually are. You know, that's, I guess, a very important step in terms of identifying with the earth, and at that point you start to care for it, I guess. So that's...
Yeah, exactly, and acknowledge it as such, and not get on the endeavor, on the track to optimize it, make it the same everywhere, you know? I think also in this, I mean, there is fascination for these landscapes, and of course, I mean, in a way, I think that's also the future of this region here. I mean, there's also a lack of water problem around Berlin and Brandenburg. I mean, it's heavy, right? So, but also then find other ways that are sustainable to deal exactly with these conditions.
And this used to be a swamp, right? Berlin is built on what used to be a huge swamp.
Yeah, I mean, you still have some remains of that, but exactly, yeah.
Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not 100% sure, but the desert that Lisa films in the US, it used to be a sea at some point. So, yeah, I'm walking down the street here. Not so many signs of the swamp anymore.
Yeah, in some, I mean, you have that with the, I know it from the Wilmersdorfer Volkspark, you know, I mean, there's some low areas, and as soon as it rains a little bit, they fill up with water, because they just, had to were drained at one point. So, and the water always comes back. That's also one lesson for the for agriculture. So that's very hard to fight it and to dry it. But of course, a swamp you can destroy very easily, and most of it is gone by today. Yeah.
For Lisa Tan's film, I found it interesting how it is mediated through different lenses. I mean, you have these lenses that make it possible to photograph or to get an image from the planet Mars, which is a very different lens from the lens that she's using to do her recordings. But I also found there was a lot of distancing. So, and a lot of mediating of these distances, I felt, although there's this incredible affection at the same time. So to landscapes. So, for example, that she drives through this desert. She's always in this car. I mean, and we have this, not only the lens of the camera, but we also have the window shield, and we have this, there's a stain on it. So you kind of, so I found that.
Or something in the picture.
Yeah, there's something in the picture. So I found that quite telling. And then again, you have for water, you have this pool, this kind of incredible waste of water. But at the same time, you feel water. I mean, it's kind of, so I found these contradictions and these tensions quite interesting. So, and also that you have this one body, you know, floating into the water, which is a beautiful moment. I mean, everybody of us knows it, but how it feels if you jump into the water. So this kind of, so that's something I found very particular. And then throughout the whole selection of films that you made, I also found it interesting how it goes from this distancing to very tiny, tiny gestures. Particularly, you mentioned it already in the last film. I mean, this tiny moments of being taken care and being also close to the body or close to an animal or holding this cat, you know, like really this kid that's holding this cat. So and that doesn't wants it or doesn't want it. So it's kind of, I found that quite particular in the selection of films.
Just to follow up on that, what do you think that the distance in Lisa's film means? I mean, what do you feel that it creates?
I think it's an interesting tension. For me, it's not creating a distance. That's what I found interesting. I mean, there is a distance so that I can recognize, but then at the same time, as with the pool, I'm not distanced from the water. So I found that interesting to recognize. But the pool is a very artificial situation at the same time. So I found that really weird. I mean, it's a kind of, so it tells me something about also how we organize ourselves as human beings within a situation. So it's kind of trying to get, to grasp it, but also it's also a bit, how do you say, vanishing, it's kind of.
There is a scene in the film when she's in the car in the desert and listening to the radio, and yes, well, first they talk about the 6th mass extinction, and then it's like, well, we'll get back to that later. First, we're going to talk about tamales and the different ways of eating, this street food, and I think that's a kind of key scene, how the distance between the seriousness of the 6th mass extinction and these tamales and how you eat them on crackers and so on. I mean, like, that for me, I think with what you're saying, with this distance, that we are here, but it's still so difficult to understand that we are here and how to kind of, I think, I don't know, a sort of perhaps desire to somehow get closer, to get closer to the reality, and at the same time the reality is right in your face, and it's a very weird lens, if you want to use that word, to experience life through.
But I think it's exactly as how Sandra describes it, she also, is quite honest about her position in there, and of course to some extent she intellectualizes that what you also just describes, and so she stays in the car. There's like a pop music on top, you don't hear the wind or so. It's, you could imagine, okay, get engaged in a different way, but it's also sort of this tension of her distance in the way of reflecting, but also then feeling, of course, connected to these landscapes, which are apparently very familiar to her as well. So I think that's what I also like about it. Of course, there's no resolution, or it remains unresolved, and a thought process in the making and so. But there's a certain honesty to it, and this I also like about it, and that also helps you as a viewer to think it farther. And with what I find in Alturas also really interesting in this, she's so much on the details, but at the same time she also has a very respectful distance, and I think she's of course at every moment very aware to be there as a stranger, not part of the community, white woman shooting there in the, I don't know Dani, what do you think? They are talking Quechua? So one of the indigenous languages in Peru. So there, the different, or the lens, or the this way of shooting is equally honest to the situation, but at the same time it is, it creates very beautiful images, or which I think in the last part where it becomes like a little photo experiment, it's also sort of emphasizing that, and also be to dare to give it a very particular tint and so on, to I think amplify the climate situation and the color, the type of colors in the landscape, and so in a way that's, I think it's amplified in there, but at the same time what I want to say, keeps a very respectful distance, and you hardly see a full portrait, you know. So that's also something. It's not so easy to achieve, but pretty important in a way to discuss in this way your own situation or your own position in of course a sort of problematic constellation where you come as an outsider. But then still, why not convey such a history and such a process or these lives, you know?
Do you know anything about her process?
Now, all these questions I would have loved to ask her, but now she's not here, and there wasn't so much information to find in the details in her way of working. What was her connection, how she was introduced, how long did she shoot, all this I would have loved to ask her, so I cannot answer that, unfortunately. Okay. There's still the bars open, right? So we don't need to leave immediately. So thanks again, Meli and Emre and everybody else of Apartment. And maybe you want to say, when does Chromatic Wednesdays continue?
Well, we have a next one episode also next week. Actually,
oh, it's not the last in
no.
this year. Shit, you should have.
We didn't want to disturb the magic, you know.
Oh, very cute of you.
Yes,
it's right. I knew it.
Next Wednesday, it's going to be more experimental, a bit noisy beats and stuff. So if you're around, like after family trips and stuff, come.
Okay. So happy
Sounds
to
good.
have delivered the second last Chromatic Wednesday.